What's up everybody, Alex here, and today we're talking camera basics. Today's video is super quick. We're talking shutter, aperture, and ISO, and everything you need to know. Let's start off with aperture. So the aperture is just how much light is hitting the sensor of the camera. So your lens is what's gonna dictate the aperture. Now this lens right here it's a 4 to a 5.6. You're already recording and you want to change your aperture, it's going to be like a noticeable click up or down. But the other side of aperture is your depth of field, or how blurry the background is going to be. You might want to isolate your subject, so you want to get a lower aperture in order to get a blurrier background. The next thing is shutter speed. Shutter speed is a lot easier. How fast your camera is opening and closing to take the different pictures or videos. For photos, a higher shutter speed is going to isolate the movement, so there's not going to be any motion blur. Then a slower shutter speed, where it's open a lot longer, is going to let more light in and it's going to get a lot of motion blur. Maybe you want to take a picture of a car going by with the tail lights, and then as that car goes by, as the aperture's still open before it has time to shut, it takes in all of that light. So now there's a streak going on with the tail lights or something along those points. But for video, it's a little bit different. You're always going to want to shoot in 24 frames per second. You're going to want to double whatever frame rate you have to get your shutter speed. So if you're in 24 frames per second, your shutter speed is going to want to be at 150. If you're doing slow motion at 60 frames, your shutter is going to be at 120. If you're doing slow motion at 120, your shutter is going to be at 240. And the reason for this is just to get natural motion blur. So if you film something and look at something yourself, it's going to look the same. And finally, ISO. ISO is like a digital light. You want to keep your ISO as low as possible to reduce the amount of noise in your footage. Every camera has their base ISOs where they work best, and if you go above that, then that's when the noise starts to come in. So to recap, your aperture determines how much light is being sent to your sensor. It also determines how blurry your background is going to be. The more light to your sensor, the blurrier the background. Now your shutter speed is going to determine how much motion blur is in your footage. If you want to really isolate a moment, then increasing your shutter speed is going to do that. If you want to create something dreamy, then bringing down your shutter speed is going to help you do that. And for video, you always want to double your frame rate. So if it's at 24, bring your shutter to 50. If it's at 60, bring it to 120. And finally, your ISO. You want to keep your ISO as low as possible. Anyway, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and check back for some more videos about some camera stuff. And yeah, I don't know.